Does that sound okay? Is that not too noisy or anything? But yeah, so today we have Keith Cameron, who I'm dead excited to welcome. But thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Yes, all right. Okay, yeah. If you want to eat, if that's okay.
Sure. Okay. So my challenge is now to fix it to myself, is it?
Should I borrow my lanyard?
That might actually be an idea.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No worries. Oh. But yeah, Keith Cameron is a contributing editor at Mojo magazine. He's written for Sounds, The Enemy, Kerrang, Q, The Guardian, The Times, and he's the author of the highly acclaimed 2013 biography of Mudhoney. And he's here today to talk to us about the brilliant 168 songs of hatred and failure, the history of Manic Street Preachers, who are the greatest band of all time, for my money. I think that's the official council line now as well. So thank you so much for coming.
No, Martin, thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure. Lovely to be here.
So I just wanted to ask you first of all about your background and how you found your way into music journalism. I understand you started in 1988, the same year the Manics released their first single.
Yes, it's a beautiful coincidence, isn't it? Well, I guess I started. That's when I started at Sounds, which was, I suppose, the first time I actually get paid. For writing. I started a few years earlier that when I was at university in Edinburgh, so I worked for the student paper there. I did a degree at Edinburgh University in history and politics, and got to the end of that. And this is a lot of this is what I'm going to be saying about, especially about the background, my own background, but also to the Manics too. It sounds like stuff from a different era, and it was quite literally the last century, so I have to remember that too. But at that point there were at least 3, if not 4, depending how you defined music paper, 3 certainly tabloid music papers published in the UK every week, which really does seem remarkable now that there are none. It seemed, even more remarkably, it seemed like a viable career option to aspire to write for one of these papers and to call it, a quote unquote career. So as I was coming sort of towards the end of my degree, I applied to do a postgraduate journalism diploma course at the City University in London. And at that time, there was kind of 2 fairly prestigious postgrad routes into journalism, and one was offered by City University, and the other, funnily enough, was offered by the University of Cardiff. And I applied to both, got an interview at both, but basically, because at that point I decided I wanted to try and be a music journalist, it seemed strange and maybe a bit self-defeating, however attractive Cardiff was as an option. And but it seemed obvious to go to London. So once I got accepted by City, I didn't even bother going to the interview in Cardiff. So things could have turned out different. I could have actually seen the Manic Street Preachers pretty much on their home turf if I'd gone to Cardiff at that point. So this would have been 87. But I didn't. So I went to London, and part of the diploma at City was that you had to do placements during your holidays at actual newspapers or magazines or radio stations. They divided the course into 3 different disciplines, and you chose at the beginning which one you wanted to do. And because I wanted to try and be a music writer, I chose the magazine option. So during your holidays, you had to sort yourself out with attachments at actual publications. And the year before I came down to London, one of my colleagues at the student paper in Edinburgh had got into City, and then he'd also got on a placement at Sounds during one of his holidays. So I just basically copied what he did. It worked for him, so it seemed. And sure enough, I got an attachment at Sounds in my Christmas holidays, started there January 1988, and was there for 2 weeks. And they basically said, at the end of it, well, this is good. You're good. We like you. Would you like to sort of, freelance for us? And I sort of said, well, brilliant, and I started getting work from them then, to the extent that I pretty much dropped. I didn't drop out of college. I did kind of stop going to most of my lectures. And to my eternal shame and annoyance, I didn't actually complete my diploma. I failed one of the exams. Annoyingly, even more annoyingly and shamefully, I failed public administration, which was effectively like a O-level version of politics.
Oh, right.
I'd just done a degree in politics. Got quite a good degree in politics. But I couldn't pass an O grade level exam just because, as anyone who goes through these things will tell you, there's an art to passing exams, which I knew. I just thought I could wing it on what I knew already, and I probably wrote too much about the first question, ran out of time to answer the other 5, and that was that. But anyway, so I didn't really care because, to my mind, and one of the reasons that these courses were so hard to get onto, these City and Cardiff courses were so hard to get onto, was because they had such a great record for getting people straight into jobs afterwards. They were kind of like, we call them now a pathway, don't we? So they were like a direct route, basically. As long as you impress the people that you were trying to impress, you're fairly guaranteed a shot at working at in the industry that you were aspiring to work in. So that's basically how I came to be a music writer. I started freelancing at Sounds in January '88, and that was it. And I kind of stayed at Sounds until Sounds closed in April 1991. And within about a month, I'd started writing for the NME, and I stayed there for the best part of 9-10 years, and then left NME and went to Mojo, which is where I am now.
And what's it like, sort of day to day working for a music magazine?
Well, again, with the caveat that this is ancient history, and what I'm about, what I'm describing just doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah,
really. Certainly, there's no weeklies anymore. I mean, it's fairly intense, chaotic. Well, it certainly was in my experience. You're producing in those days like a 80 in some cases. Some weeks NME was like was fairly chunky, and Sounds was pretty big too. So you basically had a lot of pages to fill every week.
Yeah,
and I hesitate to say that it bred a kind of careless attitude in what you were writing. I mean, none of us certainly took it lightly, but you are aware that what it is quite literally, 1 week's news is is gone a week later, and you just move on. So
you have to be fast.
You have to be fast. You have, some of your opinions that you may be writing down, you might change your mind on a week or two later.
Right.
So it's ephemeral.
Yeah.
And so it has definitely inculcates a different mindset to even writing for a monthly. And certainly when you're writing, when you come to write a book, that feels a bit more, you have to make sure you've got all your ducks in a row, as it were, because they're going to be sitting on the shelves, hopefully, for a while. Hundreds of years.
Yeah, definitely.
You're an optimist, aren't you?
We've got stuff downstairs from the 1800s. So,
wow.
This book will be on shelves, I reckon, easily hundreds of years.
Well, I hope you're right. God bless libraries.
I was going to ask, what was your first run-in with the Manics music? What was your first impression of them?
Well, the first memory I have of hearing them, I probably did hear New Art Riot, which was their second record, second single, which came out in 1990. Now, I probably did hear that in the Sounds office. I don't have any cast iron recollection of hearing it. The first record of theirs I definitely did hear was Motown Junk, which came out. It came out in January 1991, so I probably would have heard that towards the end of 1990. And I definitely remember that, and I definitely remember getting my copy of it and making sure I still had it when I left the Sounds office when they shut the magazine 3 months later. And the first time I saw them play live would have been at the end of 1990 at a gig which was filmed actually for the TV show Snub. I don't know if anybody remembers that. It's quite a famous clip of the Manics being interviewed for Snub for this little. It was like a little music magazine program, and they had bands playing live and videos, and they also had interviews. And the Manics interviews became quite infamous as the one where they basically laid out kind of elements of their manifesto for life and how they were going to take over the world, and they would never write a love song and this, that, and the other. And that interview was filmed around the time of this gig that they played at the Garage in North London in Highbury, and they showed footage of that in Snub TV. And I remember because I went to that gig because they were on. I think they were either the first or second band on. The headliners were Teenage Fan Club, who I was a big fan of.
Yeah.
even then. And so Teenage Fan Club are the band I'd really gone to see. But I obviously I'd heard of the Manics, and I was determined to see what all the fuss was about, because already you were hearing sort of stories about this incredible band that, you know, could barely play their instruments, but they, you know, their attitude was like they were playing Shea Stadium or something.
Yeah.
And it would, and in there, you know, they exuded this air that it really would only be a matter of time before they did play Shea Stadium, like the Clash, who they were obviously completely and utterly enthralled to. So I saw them. I got there early enough to see them, and they were an absolute mess, but a kind of brilliant mess.
Yeah.
You know, you were kind of captivated by them, even though you were kind of struck by how out of they were completely out of kilter with any prevailing kind of trends in pop music at that time, which, coupled with the way they looked and the intensity that they exuded, was definitely was really arresting. You know, despite the fact that, you know, musically, you know, it was all over the place. And,
Yeah.
you know, but then Motown Junk came out about a month or two later, and I just thought that was an incredible record. And so, yeah, I mean, to my mind, even if they'd only made that one record, they would have still left their mark on the consciousness, and whoever had seen them could never really forget them. But yeah, so that would be the first time.
And you've interviewed them a few times over the years since they started out. What was the first time you met them?
Well, I mean, the first time I didn't interview them until 1994. Funnily enough, the first member of the band I met was Richie, which was very briefly and awkwardly at an award ceremony. The NME Awards took place every year. It was February 1994, or probably late January 1994, and I was standing at the back of the room, because if the NME writers weren't actually allocated any seats at the NME Awards, you had to kind of skulk around the back and stuff, because it wasn't about us. Obviously, it was about the talent. So I was wandering around, and the awards were over. All the awards had been handed out, and it was just descending into sort of drunken stupidity. And that, you have to remember, at this point, Blur were really on the up. So Parklife would come out later that year. Oasis were about to release their first single, that's right. Yeah, they hadn't released Supersonic yet, but it was out in a couple of months' time, and they were already, you know, a hot topic. And Oasis were there, and the Manics were picking up. I can't even remember if they were getting an award for that year. They were just there. No, that's right. They weren't picking up an award. It was because Philip Hall, their manager, had just died from cancer about a month or two earlier, and an award had been named in his honor, the award for the best new band. So they'd gone along basically just to honor Philip. And so anyway, I'm wandering around the back of the hall, wondering how I can get out, and I bump into a colleague of mine who's got Richie in tow, and they're trying to find a quiet corner to do an interview. So I get introduced to Richie, and all I can think of is I really wanted to say sorry for a terrible review that I'd written of Gold Against the Soul, which is the second Manics album, which I'd reviewed for a magazine called Vox, which was like a monthly magazine that was published by the same people that published NME. It was kind of their attempt to muscle in on the monthly magazine market, which at that point was basically Q and Select magazines, two more magazines that don't exist anymore. And so I was mortified. I mean, again, my review of Gold Against the Soul, which I, you know, still stand by to a degree, because I don't think it is their best album. And, you know, the band subsequently, you know, said, "Oh, we agree with you on that." But I just wanted to apologise to Richie for, you know, it was quite a crass and ill-considered piece of writing on my part. And he was so shy, and he just basically he couldn't look at me in the eye, and his head just like went down to the floor, and he was like staring at the floor as I was trying to get this apology out. And eventually I just gave up apologizing and just said, "It's very nice to meet you." And then he just walked off. So I thought, well, okay, we'll leave it there. But unbeknownst to me at that point, 2 weeks later they would go into the studio in Cardiff to start making the Holy Bible.
Yeah.
And that was the Manics record that really kind of turned me from, you know, team skeptic into team believer, in the words of the Uncanny podcast, if anyone listens to that. But yeah, because basically I thought some of their records have been incredible and some of their records hadn't up until that point. Like, Motorcycle Emptiness, incredible, bits of Gold Against the Soul, not so. But the Holy Bible I just thought was a masterpiece from the very outset. And so I made sure the Enemy let me interview them finally around the time of that record. Because up until that point, I think pretty much every feature that the Enemy ran on the Manics, and they ran many, they were basically, it was people who were 100% solidly into the whole shtick that got the nod. But so I made sure that I got to do them around the Holy Bible, because funnily enough, around that time, and the Holy Bible sticks out in terms of what they'd done up until that point stylistically, and a lot of the people who had liked them from the at the beginning, or say around Generation Terrorists or Gold Against the Soul, suddenly just thought, what the hell are they doing here? This is what's this weird atonal post-punk record, and whereas that was kind of more up my street, I suppose. So I interviewed them around that point, and I only interviewed Nicky and James because Richie by that point was in the Priory receiving treatment for his breakdown, and so yeah, it was kind of a memorable interview for all sorts of reasons. Of the fact that Richie wasn't there being one of the main ones, and so that was the first time I met them, and we got on brilliantly straight away. I met them at the studio where they were having their pictures taken for the feature by the Enemy photographer Steve Double, and they brought along some music to play in the studio while they were having their pictures taken, as kind of like sort of mood music.
Right.
So I just basically walk in and they're playing the Skids.
Oh, right.
And like, as a Scot of my generation, the Skids were like a sort of key band. I mean, they were like me and my mates, we all we loved the Skids. We wanted, we all tried to dance like Richard Jobson on Top of the Pops. We all wished we could play guitar like Stuart Adamson, as if they were just amazing. And at that point, pretty unfashionable. So to walk into a room to meet this band that I've kind of gearing myself up to interview, and they're playing I think it was Masquerade or Animation. I can't remember which song it was, but it was just like, wow. Yeah. So within about 5 minutes, we're like talking about the Skids, and then it turns out that we all like cricket. So on the taxi over to where we're going, their hotel, which is where we're going to interview them, we're conversations moving from the greatness of which is your favorite Skids album to what's Ian Botham going to be doing in the in the Test match next week, sort of thing. They were kind of they were different to how you might imagine them to be. If the only if your knowledge of them was confined simply to what you'd read in the music press and listening to their records or watching them play, they were far more multi-dimensional than you might imagine. So so that was the first time I met them, and as I said, it was a great experience, and through all the ups and downs that followed, I managed to interview them fairly regularly from then onwards.
I was late to the Holy Bible because I was born in '83, so I first heard the Manics with If You Tolerate This, Children Will Be Next. I was like 15 and got obsessed and wore out my cassette of This Is My Truth, Tell Me Yours, and then went back.
Your cassette?
Yeah, my cassette.
Brilliant. Well, they kind of didn't exist for a while. Now they do exist again.
Yeah, I've had a midlife crisis and bought myself another Walkman.
Excellent.
And I went back through the back catalogue and just got obsessed with the Holy Bible. Loved all of them, but got seriously caught on that album. Yeah. And listened to, I was horribly depressed as a teenager, listened to nothing but the Holy Bible in high school for like 2 years.
Well, that would that would definitely entrench your mood, wouldn't it?
Yeah. But it was brilliant, especially because they're from a tiny little Welsh town as well, and I was up in a tiny little Welsh town in Wales. And I was wondering what the Holy Bible was like in the context of its day when it came out, because obviously it's very different. Nothing sounds like it now, really. No. But what was it like when it first came out? What was the it was reactions to it?
It was very not for the first time or last time in terms of the Manics. It was kind of it didn't really fit in with anything else that was going on, especially in the UK. I mean, it came out about a year after In Utero by Nirvana, and they're different, very different bands and different records, but Nirvana were another band that I followed very closely and interviewed quite a few times, and I could say that there's a parallel there. I mean, you could compare it approximately to that, in as much it's primarily obviously In Utero's Kurt Cobain's, it's his kind of philosophical statement, as all Nirvana records were, but it's obviously a lot darker than what had come previously. And in its way, the Holy Bible is too, although it's not entirely Ritchie's vision. I mean, hitherto the Manics had written 50-50 in terms of lyrics between him and Nicky Wire, and whereas Holy Bible's probably 75-25% in terms of who wrote the lyrics in favor of Ritchie. But it's an intense piece of work.
Yeah.
And, in Britain at that point, you've got, as I sort of alluded to earlier, you've got, Britpop is very much stirring. So you've got Blur, you've got Oasis, you've got Pulp, who've been around for a long time, but kind of found their groove around that point too. Radiohead have made their first album, then are about to make The Bends. What else? Teenage Fan Club. I mean, you've got a lot of stuff, a lot of different stuff, but the Manics, none of it sounds like the Holy Bible.
Yeah.
But the Holy Bible didn't even sound much, it sounded very different from what the Manics had done previously, really.
Yeah.
I mean, beyond the fact of James's voice, which is obviously so distinctive. And, whenever you hear a Manic song, it practically could only be them because of that anyway. Yeah. But the Holy Bible was different to anything they'd done prior to that too. And I think that was one of the reasons I connected with it so straight away too, because it kind of aligned. It was more aligned with some of my own personal taste too. But yeah, they were completely on their own in terms of British bands at that point. And to the extent that I remember, they did a package tour the previous year with was it Blaggers ITA and Credit to the Nation, which was a strange meeting of a kind of political hip hop kind of crusty-ish rock bands and the Manics. I mean, but you could have put them together with two other, any other two kind of so-called happening bands from 1993, 94, and again they would have completely stuck out. There wasn't really anybody else like them.
Yeah.
And I think that's, to a degree, that's kind of always been the case throughout the years. Really, I was struck by when I was trying to put together, on Apple Music you get these playlists, and you get bands that have been influenced by such and such a band, and bands that have influenced this band. So you look up the Manics on Apple Music influences, and the playlist of bands that have influenced the Manics is really long and really varied. You've got I think Guns N' Roses and Magazine are on it, and it's incredibly varied. And you look at the playlist of the bands that have been influenced by the Manics.
Yeah,
is pretty threadbare.
Yeah,
and you can tell that some of them are just they've been desperate to try and make up the numbers. So they've just chucked on a couple of random Welsh bands that just don't sound anything remotely like the Manics, really, but they are Welsh and they come roughly from that same period. And I think that's quite illustrative of the fact of how distinctive the Manics are, and how hard they are to imitate, and how it's almost impossible, really.
Yeah.
Or certainly it's not very easy. So I think that speaks to how singular a phenomenon they are and have been.
Yeah, and they're incredible. They've just released album number 15, which is insane.
Yes. But they never broke up.
Yeah.
That's even at the time when it seemed most logical for them to do so, they didn't. Yeah. And I think that's been to their detriment in some respects commercially. I think if the Manics had broken up and then reformed, like however many years later,
get some of that away.
They would have had that sort of commercial rush.
Yeah.
People they've never really given people the chance to miss them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which they've just carried on, and sometimes if you're always there, you get well, you get taken for granted, really.
Yeah,
People just assume that you are always there, and maybe they don't notice you so much after a while. But they carried on working, and that's kind of speaks to their, they do have a very solidly ingrained work ethic, which I think is partly down to where they come from.
And whatever they're doing, like their albums are so varied, but they always sound like the Manics.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
One of the things that Nicky Wire mentioned in No Manifesto, the documentary, was that every time they put out an album, half of the fans say they don't like it, but it's never the same half. Was it quite intimidating to write a book about a band with such a sort of impassioned fan base who aren't afraid to criticize the band? And
yeah, I mean, it does place a burden of scrutiny upon you that might not be there, depending, if you're writing about somebody else. And I was very aware of how passionate the Manics fan base is. And yeah, I mean, definitely it gave me, I don't know if imposter syndrome is the right phrase, but it's a worry sometimes when I was writing this book, I was thinking there's people who can be reading this book. There's probably people here in this audience when I'm speaking now is that will probably know much more than I do about the band. Or if they don't, they'll think they do. And that's fine. I mean, that's, but I was very much aware of that when I was writing it. It was like the people who probably were dissecting, the Manics records in far more detail than I have up to that point. So I did have to hopefully make sure that I had all my bases covered when I was writing it. And but yeah, I mean, there's still, I mean, I've done a few events in support of the book since it came out, and there's been people I've met who at the events who were like pulling me up on things that, they think I got wrong, or that they were saying, well, there's other ways to look at this sort of thing, and that's fine. And I know exactly what the Manics mean when they say that some of our fans are our biggest critics, and that that they're not unusual in that respect, but because there's so much going on in so much of their material, there's a lot for people to hang on to, and there's certainly a lot of avenues and rabbit holes for people to disappear down, and because there's so much going on, I don't think you can necessarily like every one of their records equally. I think you're always going to have favorites. So it doesn't surprise me that their fan base has these sort of cliques and people who'll champion one record or one phase, better more than other. I mean, you go into some. I try and avoid this, but occasionally I do find myself sometimes looking on message boards and online forums, and there's people just like basically sort of saying they've not made a good record since Roses in the Hospital. It's been downhill since they're on with stuff, And I'm just like, wow, okay, I'm glad. And which credit to Nicky and James for coming out with me on a couple of those promotional events. And meeting the fans face to face, because these some of their fans are pretty devoted, and obviously it was water off the duck's back to them, to Nicky and James, because they'd met these people many times before, but I was a bit taken aback by how ferocious some of the quote unquote love / hate could be. So
it's an absolutely brilliant book, and I love that it's like a proper. It's all about the songs, and I love that there's a history of how the songs were made as well, but also analysis of the songs and your write-ups of the songs. And I love the track by track sort of format of it.
Right.
What inspired that approach?
Well, I mean, that came from, I'd been to backtrack a wee bit, I'd written my first book, my Mudhoney book, in 2013. Well, it came out in 2013, and a few years passed by, and my literary agent, who'd kind of got me who'd stuck with me for that one, even though he knew it wasn't going to sell very many copies, but he believed that there was another good book in me, and he said, "Come on, you've got to do one. You've got to do one now. Do it now." And I said, "Well, okay. Well, I'm still trying to figure out what that might be." I know I had some ideas, and for one reason or another, he knocked them back. And then he sort of said, well, look, what band have you interviewed most over the years? And I said, well, it might be the Manics. He said, great, good thing, because there's not been a book, a decent book about them written since Simon Price's biography in the late 90s. And he said, we need to come up with an interesting angle, an interesting way of doing it. And I had to think about that. And there was a Manics album title that had gone unused, called, they were going to make a record called 70 Songs of Hatred and Failure. Now, this was in the period after the National Treasures singles compilation had come out, so 2011, and they considered that their next project would be this mammoth, probably 2 or 3 records even, under this banner, 70 Songs of Hatred and Failure, and which in itself was an answer, or inspired by an answer to this album, 69 Love Songs by the Magnetic Fields. So the Manics idea was, okay, we'll go one better, we'll do 70. And because we're the Manics, we don't do love songs. We won't do love songs, we'll do songs of hatred and failure. So I read, they did an interview around the time the National Treasures record came out, and they were saying, oh, this is going to be our next project. We're just starting writing songs for it now. And I thought, 70 Songs of Hatred and Failure, what a brilliant title. Amazing. Can't wait to see how this turns out. And of course, it didn't come out. It didn't happen. They kind of abandoned it because, as Nicky said, we discovered fairly quickly that writing 70 songs was was going to be a bit of hard work. And so it kind of evolved into the dual record technology concept of Rewind the Film and Futurology, which was basically 2 separate records but recorded more or less at the same time and released a year apart. So anyway, 70 Songs of Hatred and Failure was this, amazing album that never got made, in my mind. So I thought, well, we could do that. I could steal that, because they're obviously not going to go back to it. And so I said to Matthew, my agent. He says, fantastic, we've got a great title, and that suggests the format, doesn't it? I said, I suppose it does suggest a kind of song-by-song approach, which, especially these days, rock biographies, there's a lot of them. There's probably quite a few of them in this library. There's certainly lots of them in bookshops of, the ones that still exist, and the online ones. Rock biogs are kind of, there's a lot of them about, and not all of them are brilliant. So, great angle, great title. I pitched it to the band, and they said, brilliant. We, love the idea. We'd love you to do a book. And then Nicky dropped the bombshell. He says, yeah, but the type, 70s, so we can't have 70. I says, why not? He says, well, it's just 168. That's what we got to do. He just straight out, he just sort of said it. He says, 168 is the number. Now, whether he was slightly offended that I thought there was only 70 songs that he'd written that were worth writing about, that was what my initial thought was. But of course, it turns out, and of course, 168 is a number of great significance in the Manics world, because from the lyric to Motown Junk, 168 seconds is, and 168 seconds in the Motown Junk lyric, that was taken from this notion. I think it came from an NME article in the 80s, where there was somebody had suggested that 168 seconds was the optimum duration of the perfect pop single. And in this instance, the perfect pop single that happens to be on Motown. Yeah. And there are a few, I went and had a look, and there are a couple of Motown singles where 168 seconds, that does indeed fit. Oh, right. Is the, I think I Second That Emotion by Smokey Robinson and the Miracles is 148 seconds long. 168 seconds long, so it's 2 minutes, 48 seconds. Anyway, so once that had been decreed by Nicky Wire that we were going to write about 168 songs and not 70 songs, I agreed to that, and then they got on board. So that's where the kind of idea for having a song-by-song approach and 168 songs, this specific number, that's kind of where that came from. So, I mean, obviously, that once that had been settled upon, obviously it was good for me because I had the band on board. Yeah. Because I could have written it without, I could have written a book like this without them, but I don't think it would have, it's not for me to suggest whether it's good or not, but it wouldn't have been as a successful experience writing it because it would have just been me wanging on again and again and again, and it would have, for me, it would have got ultra repetitive, I think.
Yeah.
And presumably also for the reader, if it was just my opinions, they were being, bashed over the head with my theories about what song works and what song doesn't. And instead, you've got the band involved with fresh reflections and insights and opinions about their own work, which is great. I mean, because obviously they've not been shy over the years about giving interviews.
Yeah.
Far from it, which is why I could have done it without them. I could have just used my own interviews with them and, cannibalized other people's interviews as well. But, whilst that, I wouldn't have had the freshness of them now as, people in their mid-50s looking back on what they were doing when, in their early 20s.
Yeah.
And inevitably, as we get older, not only do our memories of what we did when we were, young change, but also our reflections come up with different answers. We have different opinions about what we did now as opposed to what we did then. You see what I mean? So, and their capacity for kind of self-scrutiny and self-analysis has always been has always been really impressive. But even now, they're still looking back. Nicky Wireable always, he said many times, he says, "I'm the band's biggest fan."
Yeah.
I mean, he's always listening to their stuff, and reassessing it, and deciding whether this song is actually any good or not. And opinions change over the years. So it was great to get them discussing themselves at this juncture.
Yeah, it's like a snapshot of how they feel now.
Yes.
About what their career has been like.
Yeah.
One of the things that comes up in sort of oral history stuff a lot, I used to do that, is that remembering stuff is where you are currently doing the remembering from is as important as the thing you're remembering.
Very much.
So do you think you would have had a very different book if you'd done it, say, 20 years ago?
Well, it might have been shorter.
Yeah, definitely been shorter.
I mean, and again, that was, to come back to the 168 thing. I mean, it took me longer to write as a result of that number being imposed on me. But it was good in a way too, because it meant I could include, because I took longer than I should have done to write it as well. But I was able to add in songs, to include songs from the most recent album, from Critical Thinking. Because if I'd actually delivered the book when I was meant to, that album wouldn't have come out. So the back end of me writing the book kind of coincided with them making that album, so we were able to include that too. So it gave it heightened currency. But yeah, I mean, it's it definitely helped them being able to reflect. So from their perspectives now, and James actually pointed out too. He said, "So this is probably the last time we could do this." And I sort of looking all the way back, because he's definitely finding that his memories of stuff that he used to think he knew, it just turns out that he said, "I don't remember that at all." Or he and Nicky would say something. I interviewed them separately, mostly separately. Sometimes they were together in the same room, but mostly I did them separately. And so quite often one or other would say, "Well, what did Nicky say?" Or I can't remember. Yeah, what did James say? And I tell him, I said, "Really?"
It's easy to forget how young they were, isn't it? Because one of the things that troubles me as I'm now in my 40s is all the people I look up to, and throughout my life, are much younger than me. So they were like 23 when Generation Terrorists came out, which is basically kids. Yeah, which is crazy. So it must be weird for them to look back at themselves that young.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And and hard, and also not least because of what happened to Richie, and also what they've, on a kind of more superficial level, they've had their photographs taken so often, and one of the reasons they were kind of reluctant to have pictures of themselves in the book. Yeah. Initially, although they do obviously recognise that there would have to be some pictures in there. This wasn't of such a concern to me, but the publisher was desperate. So we got to have a big picture section in the middle. Yeah. And James was just like, "We're so fucking tired of looking at pictures of ourselves. We're done with it, And I'm sure they wouldn't have said that 20, 30 years ago when they were when they were young and, more beautiful, arguably, than they are now. And that partly explains why there's a section of pictures of guitars.
I love that section.
So well, I think that's good too. And I'm one of these people that I don't play the guitar, but I love looking at guitars.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, James was definitely driving the less pictures of us, more pictures of amplifiers.
Yeah. So the second section of photos is amplifiers, guitars,
keyboards,
Richie's Mega Drive, which I love.
Richie's Sega Mega Drive, which is Nicky says he was the only thing he played on Generation Terrorists.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, Sean's drums. Yeah, some broken guitars. Yeah.
Are these old photos of things or photos?
No, they're pictures. I mean, they still have all these things.
Oh, brilliant! Is there any chance for like a Manic's archive museum exhibition or something like that? That would be amazing.
Yeah, I'm going to have to put you in touch with somebody there. That's an incredible idea. Because James still has They collectively. They have all these instruments. There was a couple of things that James had to track down. Yeah. One of them was I think it was the desk that they recorded the Holy Bible on. He found that about to be thrown into a skip in some studio in North Cardiff.
Yeah.
So that was good. So we managed to save that. But yeah, wow, a museum exhibit.
That would be amazing. Authors do it all the time. Lee Child, who's coming soon, has donated all of his notes and things from his novels to the university down in, I think, southeast of England.
Yeah.
So, there'd be a million people who want to go and have.
Well, I mean, Nicky's the band's kind of archivist in terms of he's got all their, all the like sort of reviews and stuff. He's got photocopied and filed chronologically.
Oh, brilliant!
He's got an annex to his house, which is just full of the band's stuff, basically. And he's completely, he knows what everything is.
Yeah.
So, and James, and James obviously has lots of guitars, and they've got they have their own studio, which is where I went and did all the interviews, just outside Newport, and it's full of it's full of gear.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're into that, and it kind of I love that too. I loved hearing, when I was reading the music press in late 70s, early 80s, I would just be enthralled to imagine that there was buildings, recording studios, which again, increasingly there's fewer of them than there used to be too, because obviously people can make records. That's a recording studio these days.
Yeah.
You don't need to go into these temples of sound, as I like to imagine them, but places like Rockfield in Wales, which is like Echo and the Bunnymen and Teardrop Explodes, Simple Minds, some of my favourite bands from that period, all made records at this place called Rockfield. And for years I was thinking, I would look for it on a map and I couldn't see it. And eventually somebody saw it's in, just outside Monmouth in Wales. And the moment I actually got to visit Rockfield in the mid-90s was just like such an incredible moment. And you go into these places, and I do, I believe, I'm not religious really, but I do, believe that spirits exist in these places, and you can feel that a little bit of the history rubs off on you. And of course, the Manics in their recording studio now, they have the recording desk from Rockfield, and some of their favourite records were recorded on that. Farewell to Kings by Rush was recorded on that desk and stuff. And they believe in the magic of these things, and I think we definitely shared that.
Yeah. Would now be a good time to ask to do a quick reading of one of the chapters? Now,
sure.
Would you mind reading the bit about New Art Riot as
yes.
Redditch is mentioned in it?
The Redditch connection,
right?
Of course. Right. So this is fortunately for you and my voice, this isn't one of the longer chapters. I did an event a few months ago, and somebody asked me to read the chapter on motorcycle emptiness, which is like 3,500 words long, and there was people passing out in the back. So that's and my voice was given out too. But this one's only like 4 pages long. So, but yes. So this is chapter 3 in the book, New Art Riot. Manic Street Preachers were blessed and cursed from the very start. Cursed to come of age in South Wales just as the region's descent into the post-industrial economic darklands was hastened by the outcome of the 1984-85 miners' strike, and blessed by the binding ties of family and collective purpose that traditionally define working-class communities, for better and worse, in good times and bad. Together, these forces instilled a blinkered sense of defiance and esprit de corps that would sustain the band throughout its existence. It was blazingly evident, even amid the scrawny routines of their early records, beginning with New Art Riot. Among the first three lyrics co-written by Richie Edwards and Nicky Wire, New Art Riot was the most striking and the first truly emblematic example of what soon became a manic hallmark, a metrically convoluted jostle of philosophical and political placards, given plausibility by the music's heroic uplift. When Bradfield read the lyric sheet, one line in particular leapt out: "Hospital closures kill more than car bombs ever will." He recognised at that moment that his band were at complete variance with the entirety of the UK's musical landscape, in particular the druggy hedonism of Acid House and Manchester. Says James, "It was the first song that felt like a manifesto. It's a misconception to think that statement was there to shock. It's just saying, this is the people we are, this is where we come from, and this is our intent. It put across how brutal Thatcher's government had been to us, literally coming into our town and going, 'Fuck you, you're useless.'" With Sean Moore now more in girlfriend territory than me, Bradfield wrote the music alone in his bedroom at Sir Ivers Road during early 1989. "I had my little tape recorder," says James, "my goldfish, well, Sean's goldfish, which he made me look after, and words from Nick and Richie. I had a ball for about a month." Seeking, quote, "an emotional motivation worthy of the verse's year zero indictments and exhortations," an example of which would be "Revolution soon dies, sold out for a pay rise," or "Wipe out aristocracy now, kill, 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 kill." James prefaced a gyroscopic chord sequence with a brace of staccato stabs, a structure considerably indebted to My Bloody Valentine's 1986 EP track, Lovely Sweet Darlene. The more oblique chorus, "Museums are dead, take a new art stance, paint mass suicide on the aspiration diktat," was shored up by a series of choppy downstrokes, while a bridge section overlaid the verse with a brief solo guitar flare-out. Says James, "The music had to be bam, 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 but I didn't want to chug just like Sham 69. I loved the way I'm Stranded by the Saints had such freedom to it. I thought New Art Riot was on the way to showing how the art and politics are going to bleed into each other." Although the recording still erred on the side of homespun, New Art Riot represented a considerable upgrade from its predecessor, with Bradfield in particular benefiting from Blackwood musician Reno Lusardi lending him an early 60s gold-top Gibson Les Paul. Lusardi ran the Dorothy Cafe on Blackwood High Street, where the fledgling band would meet to scheme up their next move, and he also sold copies of Suicide Alley from behind the counter. Grateful as they were to such staunch local champions, the Manics were determined that their second release would be with a bona fide record label. Ian Ballard had seen the Manics' first London gig on the 22nd of September 1989 at the Horse and Groom pub on Great Portland Street. The set opened with New Art Riot, which was also one of the slogans spray-painted on the band's shirts and guitars, and Ballard subsequently offered to release a single on his East London-based retropunk imprint Damaged Goods. Despite sending copies of Suicide Alley to every major record label in London, no other offers were on the table. So, in spring 1990, the band found themselves in a studio in the West Midlands town of Redditch that Damaged Goods had used previously. "We slept in a school gymnasium," says Nicky Wire. "The owner of the studio had the keys. He said, 'I'll put you up in here on the floor.' I think we had sleeping bags. I remember thinking, how are we going to get out if there's a fire? What are we actually doing here? It was odd. Nice guys, but the sound was just so indie. There's no frisson in any of the recordings at all." New Art Riot was too awkward to qualify as regulation ruminant agit punk, nor did it fit in with anything else in 1990's Summer of Love Redux, which was exactly how the Manics felt too. "We knew it was going to be hard to pull this off when we weren't completely on our own. When we were completely on our own," says Wire. "It wasn't like there wasn't anything happening in Britain at that point. It was actually really exciting. But we thought a title like that had to be worth it. New Art Riot is probably the first great lyric we wrote." Having quickly fallen out of setlist by the end of 1990, New Art Riot was rarely played live thereafter, barring a brief return in 1994 and a solitary reprise in Tokyo on the 18th of May 2012. In the era of Brexit, however, the song was revealed to be surprisingly prescient. In 1990, 12 gold stars on a blue field was not a common cultural signifier, and with little obvious indication that it would become so. The New Art Riot sleeve featured collapsed European stars, a representation of the flag of Europe. In conjunction with the back cover statement that, quote, nationalism is an invented product, the song's opening lyric, vintage aromas and vintage ideals, old men greying to a dying country's needs, suggests that whatever an aspiration diktat might be, its repercussions continued to be felt well into the 21st century. And that is Redditch's proud recording moment.
One of the, I think one of the coolest things about the book is having Nicky Wire and James Dean Bradfield reflecting on their own work, and sometimes they're quite critical of it, or they'll be very upfront, just like, yeah, we didn't nail that one, especially during Gold Against the Soul, which is really refreshing and makes it feel so much more like a history rather than, you know, like a biography, which is like a promotional item, that sort of thing. Feels like a proper history, and the pictures of the gear and that sort of thing really add to that as well. Were there any, did you sort of decide the song list together, and were there any songs where they were just like, yeah, we're not doing that one, or were there any that they were keen to talk about that surprised you?
Well, yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes. We came up with the list, you know, in collaboration with each other. I mean, I basically, once we'd come up with 168 as the definitive number, I, you know, compiled a list of, you know, suggested 168 songs, and ran it past them, and they agreed with a lot of them.
Yeah.
There was a couple that straight away they rejected. One of which was "She Is Suffering" from the Holy Bible, which is the only song from the Holy Bible that's not in the book. And the reason for that is because both Nicky and James just said, no, we don't like it. We think the lyrics weak. It's not Richie's finest moment. James felt that the musical treatment of it, you know, he just said it's a failed attempt to rewrite "Every Breath You Take" by the Police, which he's kind of ashamed of.
Yeah.
So I was disappointed, but I accepted. You know, I accepted it. Of course, in typical contrarian Manic Street Preachers fashion, last year on the Critical Thinking tour, which song suddenly reappears into the live set? But "She Is Suffering."
Yeah, I saw them at Audley End.
This is like 6 months before the book comes out. And I think they had almost reflected on the fact that, you know, that it wasn't in there, and they've been so vehement in insisting that it wasn't in there, that they'd gone back and thought, well, you know, we'll give it a go. So they'd start playing it live again. And there was a couple of instances where, so we had this list. So they knocked out a couple straight away. And so then we started doing the interviews. And as we went through the list, inevitably, they would have second thoughts about certain songs. And there was quite a few B-sides that got knocked back. Stuff like, I'm grasping through my mind here as to what songs didn't get, but there's a couple of Automatic Technicolor. There's quite a lot of the era when bands had to do lots of multi-format singles, and you had loads of B-sides. So I'd included some B-sides just to sort of, you know, spice it up a wee bit. I didn't want the book to be too predictable in terms of the songs it covered.
Yeah.
And so there was some of the more obscure B-sides didn't get in. But they did accept most of them. And they would go through, and Nicky would sort of say, "Oh God, do we have to do that one? Really?" And James would say, "Yeah, of course, we do have to do that one. You know, but let's." And Nicky occasionally would sort of say, "Well, I'm not sure I've got anything that interesting to say about it because I didn't play on it." Because there are some songs, and again, you know, refreshingly, you know, they're not unusual in, you know, some members of some bands when they make records don't play on everything, and but they don't really broadcast that fact. You know, I'm not sure how many members of Primal Scream are actually on Loaded or Don't Fight It, Feel It, but they're of the opinion that if they were in the same room when it was when the producer was doing it, then that's good enough. But so yeah, Nicky's quite happy to admit that he's not on some Manic records, because either he wasn't there, or James could do it better. So occasionally Nicky would say, well, if James has anything interesting to say about that one, then I'll go along with it, sort of thing. But there was one song that I really had to push for them to include in the book, and which they didn't want in at all, and which I managed to talk them round to having in the book, was Underdogs, which is on Send Away the Tigers, and it was the first single released from Send Away the Tigers. They hate that song. They're embarrassed by it. They think it's terrible. Yeah. Or not, almost, Nicky thinks the lyrics embarrassing. James thinks the music was just too, it's just too much. It's just too testosterone. He sort of say
he hit the gym before.
That's right. Yeah, they recorded it in this studio in rural Ireland, and he said the first thing I did when I got there was I went straight to the gym and started doing weights and stuff. And he said by the time they recorded that song first. That was the first song they recorded in the session, and he just said I was just my muscles were bursting, and James Hetfielded out of my mind, sort of thing, so it's just too Metallica. And they were saying, no, that's not we're not having that in the book, no way. And I said, but the fact that you released it as a single, as the first single, says that you considered it at the time to at least to be worthy of that, and to be the kind of the flag carrier, the advance, to be the advance guard for the record. That it must have been important to you at some point, and the fact that you now hate it so much is really interesting. So but it has to be in the book. And after about 15 minutes of me sort of banging away at it, they eventually sort of said, "Yeah, I suppose you're right. Let's do it."
Right.
So that was that.
That's brilliant, because honestly, I love how just open and honest they are about their own feelings about their music.
Yeah.
And, sometimes they'll say something mean about something on Lifeblood, and I'll be like, oh, I love Lifeblood.
Yes.
But, it's amazing to see them reflect on their own career in that kind of way.
And Lifeblood's a case in point. I mean, they are definitely, there was a period when, I think they were really quite down on that record.
Yeah.
But as we got into it, talking about the songs from that record for the book, it became obvious that one of the reasons that Nicky was so down on it is because commercially it tanked. They were paying the price for Know Your Enemy being the previous record, and because because that record had kind of confused and bewildered and alienated quite a lot of the people who'd maybe got into them for the first time around, Everything Must Go and This Is My Truth. And by that point, people were getting a bit bewildered by this sprawling, double album of songs about Cuba and stuff, so it wasn't what they'd signed up for. So the record after that, of course, paid the price commercially. I know, obviously, it didn't help that the first single off Lifeblood was Love of Richard Nixon, which is probably one of the least, one of the songs where the Manic Street Preachers really don't sound like the Manic Street Preachers, particularly, or don't sound like a lot of people's impression of them. So anyway, so Lifeblood goes in at number 13 and stuff, doesn't even make the top 10. And, Nicky was just mortified. I mean, he said, he remembers he heard the news that of its chart position when he was in this hotel in London called the Colonnade Hotel. And he says every time to this day when he drives past that hotel, he feels sick.
Yeah.
Because it triggers this memory of how bad he felt that day and stuff. So, I mean, they're from that generation when, chart placings meant something, and to them it was like it was almost like an existential crisis when Lifeblood fell outside the top 10. So they were down on Lifeblood, but not necessarily for its, I mean, it's it has some hits and misses musically on it, but I think its commercial failure was as much stuck in their mind as anything else. So again, in the process of interviewing them for the book for those songs, I think they definitely felt a bit more warmly towards Lifeblood. And of course, they did the reissue of it a few years ago as well.
Yeah.
And kind of, I think that helped rehabilitate that record in their mind.
Yeah.
But again, that's definitely a source of conflict, if you like, between some of their fans and the band. A lot of their fans definitely think Lifeblood is a better record than the band do.
Yeah. They seem to be in quite a sort of retrospective era at the moment with things like the video for Hiding in Plain Sight and
yes,
and that kind of them. They did a reworking of Know Your Enemy, which
That's
is brilliant.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're not afraid, they're not shy about Stalinizing their own history.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a case in point, because, I mean, of course, Underdogs isn't on the subsequent reissue of Send Away the Tigers. Know Your Enemy, of course, completely they rejigged they restored the original concept, which was like 2 separate records, and some of the, messed around with the track listing and remixed quite a few of the songs on there as well, because they weren't happy with the mix and stuff. So and again, a lot of bands wouldn't bother doing anything like that there, but the Manics have always, I think it's one of the reasons they agreed to do the book so readily, is because they have their legacy in mind at all times. They were thinking about their legacy even when they were making their first album.
Was some of it quite painful for them to go through with the rougher times in the early 90s?
Yeah, I mean, I think some there were certainly some areas that were less comfortable with than others. The Holy Bible, not so much. I mean, they've talked about that so much in the past, and I think obviously they've the fact of that record's status in their band's canon is, they don't have any problems with it. They understand why people like that record so much, and why obviously they realize why it's so important. The one record that they had difficulty with, I think, was Journal for Plague Lovers, because I'm not sure they'd actually. I mean, Nicky said this at the time. He sort of says, to be honest, I kind of blanked a lot of this out. When we were making the record, because it was when they went back to those lyrics that Richie had left them, retrospectively, or rather posthumously. This was the first and only time he'd really looked at some of these lyrics. And since they made that record, us talking about those songs when we were doing the book, I mean, it was clear that Nicky hadn't really studied many of those lyrics intensely. And sometimes Nicky will say that James understands the songs better than I do, because James has to get into the lyrics more closely than I do, because the ones that Richie's written, because James has to figure out a way of how to make a song out of them. So James will know us. He says he thinks James sometimes has more of an insight into Richie's mindset than I do, and I think that was a very good point. And I think Nicky found going back over the songs from Plague Lovers a bit harder than James did. I mean, a lot of the conclusions you have to draw from those aren't very comfortable ones at all. So that was an area that was, that was a pretty intense pretty intense couple of days in the studio in Newport, where it was like, it's Plague Lovers time, guys. But I kind of imagine, and it didn't occur to me that might have been a problem, but of course it was. It wasn't a problem, but it was harder for them to do that than, say, the Holy Bible, which they've been over so many times before.
One of the things that I love about the book, especially, is the fact that, because it's so focused on the making of the songs and on the music itself, you can just look at Richie as a songwriter and the amazing songs that he wrote. Were there any songs that you were like? I think famously Nicky Wire and James Dean Bradfield have said occasionally, like, there are some songs that Richie wrote that they don't quite get completely. Were there any songs that were a bit of a mystery where you were like, oh, Richie's input into this song would be amazing?
Well, I mean, obviously there's lots. And an obvious example is something like off the Holy Bible, PCP, which is a hard song to parse, just reading off the lyrics off the lyric sheet, and it became fairly clear that and Revol as well, again from the Holy Bible, those are songs that James and Nicky would say, well, we don't really, I don't really know what the song's about. PCP became one angle to that I hadn't really been struck by before was the aspect to the Welsh language and Richie's kind of antipathy towards the Welsh language. In his mind, the reading from the song is obviously that he thought that people campaigning for having road signs in Welsh was a kind of minor.
Right, your kids are starving, but as long as these signs are
it's a distraction from people's real problems. So in terms of it's a distraction from the real injustice, which is economic and social.
Yeah.
Basically, it's nothing to do with whether a road sign tells you to stop in Welsh as well as English, and that was an area I hadn't really explored before. I mean, but it's definitely true that the band's Welshness doesn't really emerge in their work or as a facet of their work in explicit terms until after Richie's gone.
Yeah.
A Design for Life would be a perfect example. I mean, it's obviously very much about where they came from, quite literally. And there's obviously songs that's something that recurs subsequently, the sullen Welsh heart and Ready for Drowning, obviously, which manages to be about both Richie and the injustices done to Wales and to the Welsh culture by England. But it's not a factor in the band's work while Richie was around. And again, that was something that hadn't really, if it had occurred to me, it hadn't really been salient in my mind, that there was this kind of dichotomy between the Richie era and the post-Richie era. And so that was fascinating. And it was also fascinating to have to go back to, it became clear that a lot of Richie's lyrics around that, and that song particularly in PCP, were kind of lifted verbatim from the editorials of Living Marxism magazine,
Right.
which was not something I'd expected to be delving into when I was writing this book. And it's incredible. Like, the Revolutionary Communist Party, and Living Marxism was the monthly journal of the Revolutionary Communist Party, this kind of sort of relatively obscure ultra left sect, which I'd encountered when I was a student at Edinburgh University. And the RCP, the joke was that they were neither revolutionary nor communist, but they did like to have a party, which distinguished them from some of the kind of leftist splinters that I was sort of drifting in and out of at the time. I had friends who were in the Socialist Workers' Party, and there was never really that much of a party with the Socialist Workers. And ditto the Labour Party as well, much as we might have tried. But yeah, the RCP, everybody was like looking, and very suspiciously looking at the production values of their weekly paper, which seemed to be which was full colour, which seemed a bit strange. And there was always these dark rumours that the RCP were funded either by Special Branch or Moscow or Peking, or a combination of all three. And the Living Marxism was kind of like their version of Marxism, their rival to Marxism today. And it was I dug out online some of the copies of this magazine, and it was just like some of Richie's lyrics are taken from the editorials of Living Marxism, and this was like a wormhole that I did not expect to be going down. And then subsequently realizing that when the RCP kind of fell apart and factional infighting, as all these groups tend to do, some of them went off and became leading theoretical lights on the Conservative Party, like with the Tory Party manifesto. And when the year that Boris Johnson won the election was basically authored by a former RCP member. Oh, right. And it's incredible. What's that fella's name? The children's. He was a children's laureate for some. What's his name?
Michael Rosen?
No.
Michael.
That's the fella. He wrote for Living Marxism. He was their TV reviewer.
Right. Brilliant.
So yeah, incredible.
Oh man. One of the things,
but writing a book like this will take you into strange places, and it's indicative of that's a fairly minor example, but obviously the Manics are kind of a portal to literature and film, and
that was one of the things that
politics, sport
love about them. Yeah, and like
Alberto Wantarina.
Being like, sad little depressed teenager in a tiny little town in Wales. One of the things I loved about the Holy Bible was the richness of it and how much there was to dig into.
Yeah.
I can't remember who said it, but someone said, might have been yourself, like the Manics is the only band who comes with a reading list. Which is a huge part of their appeal, and they love, writing songs about politics, and they're sort of historians in themselves with songs like Let Rosen Sing and things like that. I love that you have the they call epigraphs at the start of the chapters, where you have quotes from different people that are sort of within the vibe of the inspiration of the songs.
Well, I mean, that was something that was obviously something that, because they do that on their record sleeves, quite literally. They wear their influences on their sleeves, and on their set list still they have a, Nicky moans about it. He says it's getting really bloody hard to come up with, with these bloody quotes at the start of this. But yeah, I can't stop now, because it's, for as long as they do gigs, they'll have to have, a quote on them. And so yeah, I suggested that I carry this tradition on, and they were like, so yeah, good for somebody else to suffer. And so I had to come up with quotes.
Yeah,
a lot of them from songs, more so from songs than the Manics themselves often do, but yeah, from books and films as well too.
Yeah, and it's very Manic-y in terms of
I wanted to do that as a kind of tip of the hat to them.
Yeah, and it's again, an extra reading list.
There's more. I mean, it's true that there's been more doctoral theses written about the Manics than songs of theirs have been covered. I think there's not that many Manic Street Preachers songs being covered by other bands.
Yeah,
but there's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. It's like almost 1,000 doctoral academic theses inspired by the Manic Street Preachers.
I need to put that on the Apple Music thing. The bands inspired.
Yeah.
PhD.
Get off Apple Music. Get to the get to your local library. Yeah.
I was going to ask. What was I going to ask? Hang on. 1 second. It's gone.
It's all right. It'll come back.
No, it's gone. But I was going to ask about, as someone who's sort of spoken to the band and knows them well, what are your sort of predictions for their future going forwards? Every now and again, they'll say something scary like, "Oh, we're a bit bored now. We're going to stop," which is terrifying. I don't want them to do that.
Well, I mean, I think, there's a certain degree of tension. I don't, within the band on this subject, to be honest. I think James is terrified of Nicky deciding that he's had enough.
Yeah.
On an almost sort of weekly basis, James will worry that Nicky's about to. He did so say to me, like, I think this was before the last album was made. He sort of says, when we were doing the interviews for this book, he was sort of saying, "How's Nicky seem to you?" I said, "He seems all right, same as usual, bit grumpy." He says, "Yeah." I said, "How does he seem to you?" He says, "I think he's looking for an exit. I think he's looking for the way out." And I said, "Really?" He says, "Yeah, I just get that feeling." And then, of course, the new album came together, and I think James sort of stopped worrying at that point, because he knew it. I think James being in a band is kind of is very much integral to James's self-perception. Whereas with Nicky, I think he could take it or leave it.
Yeah,
I think that's always been the case. And Nicky doesn't consider himself a musician, even though he is a musician. But he would never put that on his profession, musician. James would, Nicky wouldn't.
Oh, right.
I'm not sure what Nicky would put, but he wouldn't put that. So I think that James needs to. I think if the Manics decided to take 3 years off, James would have a bit of a crisis, but he'd find something. He'd probably try and join another band, or he would suddenly start guesting on loads of other people's records, which he does do on occasion. He'll pop up here and there. So I think James feels it, and I think that's one of the reasons that they carried on for as long as they have, is that they have their own studio.
Yeah,
I think that's been really important for them, that they were able to do that. Because up until Resistance is Futile is the first record they made. With I think they were kind of in between studios. Some of that was written when they were in their studio in Cardiff, in Faster in Cardiff. But they were only ever leaseholders there. So when that place got the area got redeveloped, they didn't really they had to get out. So they bought the place just outside Newport. But that's really important to them, because it means it's somewhere there. They regard it as an office in a way. It's like or a clubhouse, or youth club.
Yeah.
It's like it's a place where they go, almost like as a matter of routine, whether they're recording or not.
Yeah,
they'll just go to to clock in, and it kind of assures them that they're doing something worthwhile, and it gives them it just gives them somewhere to go when there might not be anywhere else to go. But also, the fact that they don't have to worry about, who's going to pay for us to make a record. It's the recording costs are already paid for. So that's definitely held them together in a sense that in a way that if it weren't there, I'm not sure that it would be an area of jeopardy for them, I think. And I say this, Nicky and James, I kind of know how they feel about it. Sean, I've got no idea.
Right? Is he
because Sean didn't want to have, Nicky said when we were talking about the book, he says, "Well, you do realise that Sean won't have anything to do with this."
Yeah.
And I said, "Are you sure?" He says, "Yeah, I'm sure." He said, I said, "Can we ask him?" He said, "He almost said, well, yeah, we could," but he'll just say no. And he'll. And James sort of said, "Yeah, I mean, he won't want anything to do with it." I mean, Sean's James's cousin, but he's a complete mystery to him, really.
That No Manifesto documentary, most of the time with Sean, they're just following him around doing his hobbies. It's brilliant.
Sean's guns. Sean's gun collection. Yeah,
he comes across brilliantly in the book, though, because every time it's like we've gone into the studio and Sean was just come in and just smashed it. It's been brilliant. And
that's right. The best, my favourite Sean bit in the book is when they're doing "If You Tolerate This, Your Children Will Be Next," and he's basically he's in a bad mood because they've gone to the shops in Monmouth and Sean's just bought his first sports car, first expensive car, and he takes Nicky to Woolworths in Monmouth, and he parks outside Woolworths in Monmouth, and there's like these stone pillars on the pavement, and Nicky opens the door. Sean's brand new Porsche, and literally smashes it into this pillar, and so Sean's in a foul mood. Basically, can't get back to Monmouth quick enough. Can't get back to Rockfield quick enough. Can't get his drums recorded quick enough, and then basically storms out in a rage. And one of his best drum performances ever.
Yeah, I've remembered what I was going to ask you. Basically, did having Nicky and James involved in writing the book change the nature of the book in some ways? Because I think I've said on Facebook about 5 times just this week that the Manics are the greatest band of all time, the most important band of the last 40 years. Were you not able to make those sorts of claims about the band and their legacy and their influence? Would Nicky Wire have told you to calm it down, or maybe he would have agreed with you?
I think it's better. It's better for the absence. It's better for it not being all me. Basically, I think that's what I would say. Definitely, there's no. And I may have felt that I did have to kind of state a case for them, or kind of justify a book of this length. Being yes, I think you're right. But with them on board, I didn't feel that. I didn't feel as if I had to be I didn't have to self-advocate in a way.
Yeah.
I thought their presence was enough, really, and it meant that you could be a bit more, allusive in its approach. You can sort of. I didn't feel. I mean, the fact that they're being so candid about themselves throughout the whole book meant that I didn't have to necessarily say what I felt all the time, which I think would have got boring for me, and I'm sure would have got boring for everybody else. And it would have been my own, prejudices in terms of taste would have come out far more obviously, and I think the book would be less interesting because of that. I think the fact that they're so involved and so honest makes the book more interesting and more surprising in some ways. Hopefully, anyway. No, and I think a standard. I didn't necessarily want to do a standard biography, and I felt that obviously Simon Price's book does such a brilliant job of that. It kind of captures the flavour of the times from which they emerged and the place that they emerged from. I didn't necessarily want to have to go back and sort of say what, and then Nicky met James at school and stuff, and blah, 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 blah. That whole kind of expositionary approach, which is increasingly, I feel tired when you see that, done over and over and over again in rock biographies. I thought, any way to avoid doing that and any way to do it differently would be welcome. So I hope that that the approach has the book seems to have landed quite well generally with people. So I hope that's one of the reasons why. Yeah, definitely, and I absolutely loved it and highly recommend it to anybody. Does anybody have any questions at all? I'm aware that we're sort of I've kept it for a while. Does anybody have any questions for Keith at all?
I'm sorry, guys. Didn't realise you had no chairs. Okay.
Do they listen to people who use their recording studio or not?
Do they? That's a good question. I think other people have recorded there, but only if they're doing stuff for a Manic's record. So I'm not sure that they have let anybody else go there. It is very much their own kind of private space, really. Yeah, that's a good point. So no, I don't think they have. I mean, they've done it. Gwenno Saunders, the singer, who has made several records, but she has recorded at Door to the River, but it was for a Manic's song. So no, it's not like they let it out to other people to make money off, which a lot of bands who have their own studio will let it out. So no, I don't think they do.
Quick question: out of those 168 songs, which one for you has the most resonance and importance for you personally?
The one song, the most. Oh gosh,
Put you on the spot.
That one song is really hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think. Faster is a song that which would have been the first Holy Bible song that I would have heard, because it was the first single to come off that album. I mean, that to me is still one. It's probably one of my 5 favorite Manic songs, because I mean, almost every aspect of it is just, it seems to sum them up. An aspect of them just perfectly. Just the sonic attack of it is just incredible. The way that the voice, the narrator of that song appears to be having a debate with themselves in a mirror. I am an architect, and it's they call me a butcher. It's like it's a conversation. I know I believe in nothing, but it's my nothing is I think just such a powerful kind of philosophical statement, and something that I've felt quite a lot. So I think it resonates with me personally, but also it's just a phenomenal feat of writing, really, I think. And I think to see the band that summer when I saw them at Glastonbury Festival in 1994. One of their infamous Glastonbury appearances when Nicky Wire suggested that they should build more bypasses over this shithole. I mean, to see them then, they were just terrifying. They came on, the skies were just getting dark. There was they had military searchlights and sirens sort of, strafing the whole field just before they came on, and they kind of, I think they tore into that. That may have been the first song they played, or it was one of the early songs they played on that set, and they were incredible. So, but yeah, Faster would be up there. But I could probably comfortably narrow it down to 5, but to narrow it down to 1 is a very tricky one. Yeah. So it's a hard question.
Do you think overall the Manics are satisfied with their career?
They're a hard band to please, and they don't take. They're not. James especially is not very receptive to praise in many ways. They're very self-critical. So I'd hesitate to speak for them in that regard. I mean, I sense that, and I think that's one of the reasons they continue is because they're still looking for that perfect song, which I don't think they believe they've yet found it. I mean, I'm sure they think they've come close, and I think they would probably agree that they're getting better. A lot of their more recent stuff is more, I think, more comfortably musical in some ways. The fact that Nicky can now take a lead vocal on a song, as he did on the most recent album, without having to be persuaded to do so. So I think they're more comfortable in themselves, but I don't think there's any kind of sense that they're kicking back and relaxing in terms of their creativity. I think they will continue without a doubt, because because once they've done something, they're always thinking what's coming next. And James always says that he feels a bit uptight. He has that kind of angst, whether it's about Nicky not wanting to continue with the band, or whether Nicky's not coming up with any lyrics. James always gets a bit anxious until that moment arrives when Nicky starts handing him sort of lyrics, and once that moment happens, then James thinks, okay, game on, sort of thing. So I mean, I think they're satisfied, but I don't think they've in any way feel that the job is done. No.
Don't view their real commercial successful songs different from the ones that maybe weren't so commercially successful. You know, you got Design for Life and all that. I view those differently.
I mean, I think there's some songs that they feel that they can't get rid of. I think that's something that that's definitely a theme that came up occasionally during the process of our discussions for the book. So there's some songs that they kind of not roll their eyes. Well, actually, there are some songs where they think, "Oh, we still have to play. You stole the sun from our heart. You stole the sun from my heart." I think Nicky in particular just thinks, you know, actually he doesn't mind that one so much because it's just one note on the bass throughout the verse, which is Nicky's idea of the ideal bass line. But yeah, I think that's an example of a song that it's such a signature song. They think that the audience would recoil if they gave that. Of course, this being the Manics, there's definitely an element of their audience to be quite happy to see the back of it as well. But if from a pragmatic point of view, they realise that there's another whole segment of their audience who would think, well, why aren't they playing that song?
We went to watch James 70 years ago.
Oh, right.
And they didn't do Sit Down.
Right.
And as we left, people were going mad.
Really?
And it's not my favourite James song, so it didn't bother me. But
Yeah.
The rest of it was good.
Right.
They didn't. I think because the new songs haven't gone down very well
Yes.
with the audience.
Yeah.
And I think surgery I'm not going to pay.
No, really.
Well, I don't know. But
No, well, I mean, there's definitely been times when the Manics have got tired of certain songs, and I think they did stop playing. Maybe it was "You Stole the Sun." They stopped playing for a while, but they've had to put it back in. And James, I think, is still threatening to get rid of "Motorcycle Emptiness."
No.
See.
This is the Albert Hall.
Exactly, they did. Yeah. So maybe they've
Saw them play a faster acoustic.
yes.
Which was a terrible experience.
Well, see, the Holy Bible stuff is problematic. I think in more recent times they felt that they don't really have they're finding it harder to summon the the sort of collective physical mindset to deliver those songs, especially the Holy Bible songs, in a sort of convincing way. I mean, they've been playing "This Is Yesterday," but that's kind of that's a different beast from say "Of Walking Abortions" or "The Intense Humming of Evil." So I can understand why they might have difficulty there. But yeah, "Motorcycle Emptiness" again is they seem to be resigned to the fact that that's it's pretty easy to resign yourself to having to play "Motorcycle Emptiness" every time you play live. It's incredible. But yeah, I mean, Nirvana for a while didn't play "Smells Like Teen Spirit" because Kurt was just sick of it, and what it had become. Even about a year after he wrote it, it had become a millstone around his neck. And of course, when they start playing arenas and stuff, he very soon realized that there would be trouble if he didn't play it. So yeah. All bands who have that kind of signature song, well, I think will come up against that, and probably soon. Maybe the old, I think the Manics now are at a point where they think, well, there are bigger problems to have than having to play "Design for Life" every time you play a concert.
Yeah. Jane?
So,
Hi.
I just wanted to think an audio version of the book with the songs included.
Ooh.
I can imagine myself
Yes.
listening to the song and reading.
Yeah. There isn't, but I mean, it's not a bad idea. I think the band might have had. There could be publishing issues with that. I'm not sure, but yeah, I've met quite a lot of people who've said that they've been the book's taken them even longer to read because they stop reading and then they start listening.
There is a Spotify playlist.
There is
got the
Spotify
demos and
playlist.
things on, which is really good.
Yeah, yeah,
If you don't mind giving your money to
Yeah.
evil Spotify.
yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's something worth considering. And there is an audio version of it, but there's not an audio version with music. No.
other than yourself, who do you think being their greatest advocate?
Who?
The DJ and the journalists out there. And
Oh. I mean, obviously Simon. If no one's here if you haven't read Simon Price's biography of him, you should probably try and do that, because it came out in 1999 and hasn't been reissued, hasn't been updated or anything. I mean, that's a great introduction to the group. So Simon was a big advocate early doors. Stuart Bailey is another journalist who's written throughout his NME career. He was a very strong advocate for the band, and certainly his writing on the band is still really interesting. There's actually if anyone's really interested in the Holy Bible and they want to go really, really deep into it, which you can, there's a blog called 227 Layers, and that I would recommend to anyone who wants to lose themselves in the small details of the Holy Bible, as I did when I was writing this, and it's just incredible. I think it's an academic. I'm not sure what he specializes in, but he kind of wrote this as a kind of a hobby, and it's remarkable. It's by far the best writing about the Holy Bible is on this blog. It's called 227 Layers. You should look that up. Amazing. I recommend it. It's a gentleman at the back. Yeah.
What did you find the most intriguing of the interviews?
Good question. I mean, of the ones we haven't mentioned yet, I mean, Motorcycle Emptiness was fascinating to do that, because it became clear, especially in their description of how they wrote it, how it really wasn't. It was a composite of a couple of really old songs that they'd kind of almost forgotten about or just didn't think were worth pursuing with. And they basically had to be persuaded by Steve Brown, who produced Generation Terrorists, that there was good stuff here. They just needed to work out a way to use it properly. And hearing them going through James especially going through the process of how he wrote that song under Steve Brown's tutelage, basically, his method of, he would lock James, he literally would lock him in the studio and say, "You're not coming out until you've written a guitar solo that's worthy of this song." Yeah. And James was basically, he was in there for like half an hour, basically working away, or maybe even longer. And then Steve Brown would just come in with, he'd holding up his mug of tea triumphantly, saying, "That's the one, that's the one." And digging deep into the influences behind that song's lyric, and it's heavily influenced by Rumblefish, the Francis Ford Coppola film, which was a personal favourite of mine, which I saw at a very impressionable age, and I think they did too, and it kind of hit us collectively pretty hard. And it was fascinating going back to that, and just getting really deep into that song in particular. So it seems an obvious answer because it's such an important song, and I wasn't certain that it would reveal itself as having anything that I didn't already know about it. But the process of doing the book the way we did certainly revealed that there was plenty more about that song that I didn't already know. So I'd say Motorcycle Emptiness.
I think we've got time for one more question. Yes.
Have you got any future plans for other bands? Would you take on a project again this side?
That's a great.
Well, yes, that's a question that my agent has been asking and my publisher on a regular basis ever since, and I've been kind of trying to stonewall that. I mean, James Dean Bradfield did say that he said you can't. He says having put all this work into this format, you really should, in the nicest possible way, make the most of it and churn out. He didn't say churn out another quickly, but he sort of said, look, you could apply what you've done to us to another band.
It's a great thought. It's a really great.
So I mean, so there was U2 has been suggested, REM has been suggested, which would obviously be fairly heavy hitters.
Yeah.
Suede has been suggested.
Brilliant.
Which of course there's a Manic's connection there, since they've toured together quite a bit. And so those are thoughts. But I would have to. I promised myself it would be less effort than this was. But the problem with doing the format with another band is I'm not sure. I mean, the Manics are completely. To my mind, they're unique, and one of the reasons they're unique is that there's not many bands who are so willing to subject themselves to this kind of self-scrutiny, and to engage with it in the way that they did. I'm not in any way, saying that U2 wouldn't necessarily, for instance, but I'm fairly certain they wouldn't be as open to it as the Manics would be. Yeah. So I think that doing a book like this with them is maybe kind of set the bar unnecessarily high, but I bet I need to crack on really because time is short and life is cruel, as somebody else said once wrote.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that. That was brilliant. We have books for sale at the front.
Can I just ask somebody, since I've
Oh, yes,
got some Redditch questions. Now, there was a colleague of mine, Danny Eccleston, who's a senior editor at Mojo, grew up in Redditch, and he's wondering whether anybody remembers a club called Top Cats. Yes. Is it still here? Is it still there? No,
No.
it's not there
Is it
anymore.
under the shopping centre?
What was in the marketplace?
Oh, right. Yeah, he said it was awful. He said there was a bar. There was a bar called Dibbles, as in Officer Dibble. And does anybody remember a band from Redditch called the Crypt Kicker 5?
Yes.
You do?
They're friends of mine, yeah.
Were they?
Yeah.
Danny thinks he's got a tape, a cassette that they made in the mid-80s.
They're big friends with Balaam and the Angel.
Right. Okay. Right. Okay. And is anybody here from Matchborough? You're the councillor for Matchborough. Wow. Well, thank you for coming. That's where Danny grew up there. That's yeah. Brilliant. Oh well, that's top knowledge.
If you'd opened the window at 5 to 3, you would have heard into the valley.
Why is that?
The Redditch Football Club, it's the Valley Stadium.
Yes, sir.
And they always come out
Come out to
to
that,
Do they?
Yeah.
Oh,
When you said that, I thought,
Thank God,
might
yeah.
not have heard it.
Absolutely.
Just
amazing.
a mile away.
Oh,
And they've done that. Why? I don't know. But obviously
the valley.
But who got that record?
That's fantastic.
There you go.
Oh, brilliant.
Well, thank you very much. That was
Thank you.
amazing. And it's such a pleasure to have you. And you've come a long way, so I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Martin.
It's a
Thank you.
brilliant book.
Thank you, folks.